Hey there, nice to meet you. My name is Keith. I'm an engineer in the energy sector, and you're watching this video because either you're a subscriber or the friend or loved one of a subscriber and they sent you here. This video is your wake-up call. I'm going to light a fire under your ass because things are changing. They're about 10 years away, and you're running out of time to adapt to it. This video is going to talk quickly about what to expect, how to adjust, and how to be prepared for the changing world that we're going to see by 2030. The quick and dirty is that life as we know it is changing and is going to rapidly evolve how it's changing over the next 10 years. The ISO and the IEA and many other organizations around the world are finding out ways to actually decarbonize the economy. Through my job, I get access to a lot of this information, but it's also public knowledge. In the video description, I'll link to reports that go into more detail about this if you're interested. In short, we know where this is going. There's a lot of talk about climate change driving the change over to solar panels and EVs, but really, the world isn't set up to care about those things under a capitalist system. The world is set up to care about profits. The thing is that we're running out of the energy source that basically led to the explosion of innovation and technology. And yes, I'm talking about hydrocarbons, and we're simply running out of them. The economy is set up to be based off of maximizing GDP. This is what capitalism does. It maximizes profits. And there's a 1-to-1 ratio between GDP and energy spent. And there's also a 1-to-1 ratio between energy spent, GDP, and resources consumed. Now, the financial systems that we live in demand constant economic growth. That also means constant energy growth and constant resource growth. And at between 2 and 3% annual growth per year, it's roughly a 25-year doubling. That means every 25 years, we're going to double the amount of resources that we consumed. For example, in the last 30 years, we've consumed more energy through liquid fuels than we have in the entire rest of human history. And each time that we double, the doubling time gets shorter and shorter. Now, over the winter, I did a series on collapse and climate change issue and renewables and fighting misinformation. This video isn't about any of that stuff, but it's kind of related. This video isn't going to talk about the carbon impacts of burning fuel. This is just talking about the economic, ecological, and financial impacts and the political impacts of burning fuel. And I'm not talking about politicking, left versus right. I'm talking about politics, how humans organize civilization and society. Now, speaking of politicking, I usually am really hard on the right, but the left is just as hypocritical as the right. For example, Biden will go to a COP and state that he's very pro-climate, but then he'll go and approve the Willow Project. And if you had any doubt whether or not governments of the world would be the first ones to sacrifice short-term progress in order to show the world that they're a climate leader, this should tell you everything that you need to know. So what does the approval of the Willow Project, for example, have anything to do with gardening? Well, that's why we're here, aren't we? The reason that we're here is because I believe that we're roughly 7 to 10 years away from a dramatic societal constriction. Earlier in the video, I mentioned the IESO Pathways to Decarbonization report. What this report looked at is how we can transition away from an oil, coal, and gas-based economy towards a renewable economy. A big part of this is converting the transportation network to EVs as well as the energy production to things like nuclear, solar, wind, hydro, and geothermal. Now, as an engineer, looking at the scale of what's required in order to do this in the time frame that we need, just my public observation as an engineer, it is not going to be possible. Just as an example, the IESO report states that we need roughly 3 times the nuclear power that we currently have. Now, nuclear power plants, even if they got licensed today, they have to go through environmental assessments, they have to go through siting guides, they have to go through design phases, vendor selection, technology selection, and then they actually have to get created and produced. You have to get the parts. The lead time on some of these parts can be upwards of a decade. And if all the countries in the world are trying to address the same problems, which they are, there's only so many qualified nuclear grade boiler makers that are out there. There's only so many qualified nuclear engineered welders and pipe fitters and electricians that are out there, and engineers. So not only is this going to be impossible just on the time frame, even if you discounted the fact that the whole world is going to be rushing towards this, when you also consider that everyone's going to be doing this at the same time, the lead time for a nuclear grade steam generator, for example, won't be 10 years, it's going to be 30. It's not even going to be possible to obtain. Then we're talking about mining implications for getting lithium, cobalt, copper out of the ground. And while copper has actually been shown that there's enough copper reserves in the world to do this, what happens when the copper demand goes up tenfold and the people who are sitting on these copper reserves know that they have the copper that the world needs? The prices are going to get jacked up. So some things just simply won't be economically feasible for some places. Some things won't be actual resource feasible, like, for example, mass producing all of the lithium needed for solar and the battery tech. Some things just won't be possible from the people power, like getting nuclear grade qualified engineers in order to build your stations. Even if nuclear enrollment increased 20-fold in the next 3 or 4 years, it's still not going to be enough to supply the global demand in order to transition these systems. Okay, so now let's talk about the energy efficiency of these things. Getting oil out of the ground, burning it, and using it for work is essentially roughly a 10-to-1 return on investment. Now, it's getting much more expensive now that we're actually squeezing oil out of rocks, but that's ballpark what it is. These are extremely energy-dense materials. These are the things that are literally funding the lifestyles that we know. And for example, on the internet, there are pro-capitalist speakers like, say, Jordan Peterson, people like this, who claim that things have never been better because of capitalism. But that completely ignores the fact that capitalism was a system that just happened to be in place while we had access to this free, abundant energy source. Human technological innovation was not based off of capitalism. It was based off of access to free liquid fuels that were returning anywhere between 100-to-1 to 10-to-1 now in terms of energy out compared to energy in. I'm getting hailed on here. Now, many renewables are also roughly about 10-to-1, but when you actually factor in actual production, for example, the sun doesn't always shine, seasonality, discrepancies in wind projections versus actual wind. I mean, just look at what happened to Germany. They basically had a month of no wind, and that skyrocketed their energy prices. So a more realistic number for solar is roughly 4-to-1 energy in versus energy out, which is actually pretty good. But an economy designed off of 10-to-1 cannot run off of an energy source of 4-to-1. And while that's still worthwhile doing, especially if the better alternative, better in terms of energy output, coal, oil, and gas, is not even going to be possible in the future, it's still worth doing, but it's just not what our economy is based off of. And this is one of the reasons why nuclear is going to be such a key critical role in order to keep lifestyles even remotely resembling what they do today. Now, all of this is completely overlooking resource usage. It's completely overlooking overshoot, and I have a video that goes into detail on that. And let's just, for argument's sake, continue to live in the fantasy land that we can transition our current economy to a green one. Okay, so let's put this all into context now and why I'm saying that I'm lighting a fire under your ass. The reason for this video isn't to scare anybody. The reason isn't saying that humanity and society is going to collapse. But what I'm saying is that the economy that we know is going to end. Even if we magically transformed and could create the energy that we needed, if we could just snap and put a bunch of nuclear power plants in place and get completely off coal and gas, that doesn't mean things are going to be able to continue the way they are. The coal, oil, and gas industry doesn't just produce fuel for burning. It produces many things that the economy depends on. Things like plastic, rubber, and materials that are used in the actual consumptions of the things that we define GDP by. So even if we transition the GDP energy side into clean energy, we still are going to have a giant demand for coal, oil, and gas, not even slow down or stop, but continue to grow. Even with clean energy, the current financial system is going to demand coal, oil, and gas continue to ramp up. The continued expansion of our oil, gas exploration, things like the Willow Project, show that not only are we not stopping, not only has every single COP and all of the policies and good things that we've signed, not only have they done absolutely nothing to restrict the amount of coal, oil, and gas that we're actually mining out, and all we're doing is speeding up towards the eventual gulping sound that we're going to hear. Why is that important? It's important because the cost of everything that you think is normal is going to change. Now, a big reason why your life is going to change, why society is going to change, is based off of peak oil. And peak oil, I'm not talking about Hubbard's curve. I'm not talking about Hubbard's peak oil. Hubbard's curve is kind of contentious among economists because it looks at conventional oil. But since then, we've discovered unconventional oil. And for those who don't know, conventional oil is just sticking a drill in the ground and getting oil coming up. It's the easy oil. It's the high energy out compared to energy in oil. It was originally thought that peak oil would happen sometime between the 1970s and the year 2000. But then we developed unconventional oil, which is like fracking and shale. This allowed us to continue getting oil out of rocks. But the energy in versus energy out is much different. So what's happened is we've actually extended what peak oil is, but we've downgraded the quality of the oil and what we consider oil. And in the production numbers for barrels of oil, there's things in there that's not even oil, such as ethane, natural gas, liquid natural fuels. These are things that are used to create products like plastic bags, but they're not necessarily oil. They're not the things that are driving the energy in the economy. So not only is this new downgraded oil kind of muddying the waters of when peak oil is, it still actually looks like, even with that in there, peak oil was sometime in November 2018. But that hasn't stopped the economy at just largely ignoring this and continuing to grow. Even despite the temporary constriction during COVID years, the economy is booming more than ever. And the bailouts that were created as part of the incentive programs, both during the 2008 recession and during COVID recession, show you that governments of the world are just going to ignore the fact and the fundamental realities that we're facing, because we're never going to stop growing the economy until we literally hit that brick wall. The problem is that the longer that we ignore this, the worse that impact is going to be. And it's probably going to be felt the most from the average person at the cost of everyday things, but mostly in food. Because let's face it, with stagnant wages, the cost of everything going up, your cost of living increasing from inflation, things are getting harder and harder to do. And when you start constricting back what you can buy, you're not going to constrict your food. You need to eat. You're going to constrict the crap that you buy. And when we buy less stuff and the economy starts constricting, governments start spurring the economy. And when the only way to continue spurring the economy through Keynesian economics, we must constantly grow, is to basically drop interest rates, create money through loans. When someone takes out a loan at the bank essentially is printing money out of nowhere. And when this printing of money keeps happening in order to spur this fake economy that's detached from any source of reality, what happens is inflation, the cost of everything getting further out of whack, and eventually there's just this reckoning where people lose confidence in money. So what all this super boring stuff means is that life is going to change drastically, and it's probably going to happen in the next 10 years because it's going to be brought on by the oil collapse. And because governments just haven't done enough. We needed to start transitioning in the 1970s to a different economy, and we just didn't do it. In order to transition to a green economy, we need to burn more oil to produce the stuff that's ready for the green economy. We need to completely revolutionize manufacturing to a green economy, and there's just some things that you just can't do with solar power. Most of that stuff is on transportation and the actual resource extraction to fund the GDP that we define as growth. The whole reason why people like Jordan Peterson, for example, claim that nothing has ever been better because of capitalism, it essentially ignores three major things. The first is that we've been exponentially increasing our consumption of a non-renewable resource to support this. The second thing is that the environmental and ecological externalities, that is the environmental costs for cradle to grave of all the products that we consume, so from mining to manufacture to transport, packaging, consumption, and then final inevitable waste. These things aren't factored in. So for example, if we had a tax-based system where we just stopped taxing humans, you didn't tax income tax, but what you did was put an environmental externality tax on all the goods that you consume. Well, all of a sudden, you might make $60,000 a year and you get all of those $60,000 to spend. But maybe that iPhone that you just bought doesn't cost $1,000 or $2,000, it costs $6,000 because the environmental externalities are actually priced into the product. Now, this is something that capitalism just grossly ignores because we only look at maximizing GDP and we completely ignore the environmental externalities of the things that make up GDP. And because of that, we actually sacrifice true wealth, which is the natural abundance of the planet and its resources, in order to produce fake wealth, which is GDP. I talk about this a lot in my collapse video. Now, if these externalities were ever priced into the goods, you better be sure that the capitalists are going to pass it off to the consumer. But at least then the consumer would make intelligent choices based off of just the simple financials of their purchases. For example, maybe that weekend trip to Vegas that now costs $20,000, maybe it's now not something that people do. This would lead people to maybe stop destroying the planet so bad, certainly would destroy the cruise industry, but maybe we'd have a hope of coming out of this thing. The third thing that it ignores is the fact that the only reason things cost the way they do is because we've outsourced those externalities to the basic global south. So when you go to Walmart and you buy a t-shirt off the sale rack for $5, it only costs that much because an 8-year-old in Bangladesh made that t-shirt. So when the people who are on top of this global Ponzi scheme, basically you and me, are talking about how capitalism is the best thing because life has never been better, well, better for who? It's certainly better for us, that's for sure. But what does the exploited global south think of that statement? They certainly wouldn't agree with it. I also don't think that the animals and insects that are going extinct based on the way that we grow our agriculture and food would think that this is a great system for them. Okay, so putting extinctions, climate change, and the exploited global south aside for a moment, why is this a call to arms to you? Well, essentially that the things that we need to do to maintain our lifestyle is just not going to be possible. The things that are in the IESO Pathways to Decarbonization report, we're going to try our best to do. We're going to try our best to decarbonize. We're going to try our best to maintain the economy and the lifestyles that we have. We're going to continue to try to use 3 Earths worth of materials every single year. We're going to continue to try to live in overshoot in order to maintain the lifestyles that we know. But the only thing that I can tell you for a fact is that the reckoning is coming. And don't think of me as some person standing in Times Square holding a apocalypse is coming, reckoning is coming sign. I'm just stating the obvious, that our economy and everything to do with it is based off of constant economic growth, and that's just not possible. And we're starting to see the limits of that now. We're starting to see energy forecasts on what we need in order to support our economy by 2030, 2040, and 2050, and I can tell you for a fact that they're not possible. So what I'm saying is what we think is normal, the prices that you see in the store, the availability, ease, and access of food at grocery stores, these things are not going to be possible. I'm not even talking about climate change, and that's going to come. That's already here. Last year, some of the farmers around here had the worst years that they've ever experienced, but those are probably going to be some of the best years that they'll experience in the next 10 years. But what I'm talking about is it takes 10 units of energy to create 1 unit of energy of food in our current global food system. This is just the energy cost in giant combines and harvesters and transportation packaging. What does that look like when some of the technologies that we rely on right now are just simply running out in terms of resource shortages like phosphorus? What does it look like in places like Canada when seasonality starts breaking down? For example, measurements taken a month ago of ocean temperatures near the equator were the highest on record in history. What marine biologists are noticing at the same time is that fish are migrating away from these warmer temperatures up north. So the economic stability of villages in and around the equator are starting to implode already. Climate change is here, it's happening. Whether or not you believe it's from carbon or it's just a natural cycle, it's real and it's here. So these ecological effects are already starting to happen. The world has had massive crop failings in February and March down near the equator. This is where a majority of the food gets shipped from in order to support places like where I am in Canada. Changing migratory patterns has also impacted things like avian flu. Everyone kind of knows what happened to egg prices recently. Well, get used to this kind of stuff because it's going to be happening all the time. And not only are the problems actually worse, but the actual capitalist gouging based off of those things is actually getting worse as well. So what does that mean for you? It means that your life is going to transition drastically in the next 10 years, and you better get ready for it. Now, the good news is that getting ready for it is actually going to make your life better in every way. This isn't a doomsday message. This is a message that a constricted, lower energy economy is coming, that you should get prepared and ready for it, and that you should find enjoyment in this. Over the last 10 years, my personal life has gotten drastically lower energy, and it's gotten better in every single measurable way. From my happiness, my health, my reduced stress, and my connection to nature. My life has improved in every measurable facet, and I'm spending less money, and I'm definitely spending less energy. So let's talk about what that transition is and how you can get going, and why you need to do it now. So from my lens as an engineer working in the energy sector, I can tell you that we're probably about 7 to 10 years away from massive societal change. I don't know what happens to the food industry when all of a sudden the fuels that we are depending on just dry up. It took humanity hundreds of years to transition from a food system where everybody grew their own food and it was very decentralized, to the current centralized system where coal, oil, and gas support machinery and fertilizer to basically feed the world. And not only are insect collapse and loss of topsoil and climate change going to impact that, but probably the most impactful thing is that the liquid energy that supports it is essentially running out. So we're 7 to 10 years away from massive societal change. And you know what else is about 7 years old? My food forest. You're about 7 years away today from being able to have a tree produce food on your land. So if you plant a tree, it takes anywhere from about 5 to 10 years to start producing food. That means that you, watching this video right now, are probably in one of the most critical years of your life. Because you're going to very quickly go from you actually have time to get something like this started on your land. If you have a grass lawn, start replacing it with food that grows on trees. Start growing a garden, build your raised beds now, get access to the wood that you need, get access to the soil that you need. Start building your skills that you need to learn how to grow, learn how to plant trees. Check out my videos on do-it-yourself guides for sheet mulching, how to properly plant a tree, and just honestly get going. Because it might be this year, but at one of these points, it's going to be a year where even if you started to plant your trees, you're not going to get the food when you need it. When the food system breaks down, and it will break down, your survival is going to depend on how well you listen to this video and whether or not you started building your own food forest, gardens, and sustainability in your life. And keep in mind one thing, the later that you wait, you're going to be standing in line with the rest of the people who are trying to get in on this. And you only need to look to COVID to know how bad that was. During COVID, it was impossible to get things like reusable lids and jars for canning, to find chickens, and to buy fruit trees and seeds. These things were out of stock everywhere. And if you think it was bad during something that we elected to lock down and kind of disrupt the economy, wait until you see how bad it's going to be when we don't even have a choice. When those disruptions are going to be involuntary and the whole world is going to be going through it together. This is what we're about 7 to 10 years away from, and you're about 7 to 10 years away from really wishing that you would have planted a tree today. So this is your wake-up call. Start learning how to garden, start planting trees. If you can, get chickens, work on your sustainability, secure your energy. Don't do it because it's better for the planet. I mean, sure, do it because it's better for the planet, but do it because you actually got to take care of yourself and your family. So thanks for watching this wake-up call. I hope you listen to it. I'm going to link right now at the end of this video to a sheet mulching guide, which is how you can get started converting grass lawns into gardens or food forest systems. Check out my essentials playlist. This is the playlist that I've set aside that will basically get you up and running as quick as possible. See you on the next one.